The room smelled like recycled air and cold food. Veth Saran had been sitting in the same chair for 9 hours. His back hurt. His eyes hurt. The screens in front of him had not changed in 11 years. Not in any meaningful way. A blip, here. A cargo freighter there. The occasional debris cloud drifting through Sector 4 like it had nowhere better to be. Monitoring duty at Outpost Relay 9 was not a prestigious posting. It was the kind of assignment that got handed to analysts who were competent enough to not get fired and unremarkable enough to not get promoted. Veth was, by all measures, exactly that kind of analyst. He picked up his meal container and looked at it. The food had gone cold an hour ago. He had not eaten it. He was not sure why. It was not that he was not hungry. It was more that eating felt like a decision, and he had run out of energy for decisions sometime around hour 6. He set it back down. 3 more hours, and the shift was done. He had plans. Sleep, mostly. Maybe something warm to drink. The kind of evening that asked nothing of him, which was the only kind of evening he had the appetite for anymore. The console beeped. He looked at it. Outpost relays beeped all the time. Microbursts. Stellar background noise. The systems running their own diagnostics, because there was nothing else for them to do. He had learned, in 4 years of this posting, to sort beeps the way a person sorts, mail most of it nothing, some of it mildly relevant, almost none of it requiring him to actually move. He glanced at the screen. Sector 7, null. He sat up. Sector 7. Null was the dead corridor. Everyone called it that, even in the official reports, which said things like navigational hazard zone and transit inadvisable region, but meant the same thing. The gravitational shear in that corridor was so severe, so precisely wrong, that nothing with a mass above a certain threshold could pass through it without being pulled apart. The physics were not subtle about this. The physics had, in fact, been used as a teaching example in 17 compact academies for the better part of 2 centuries. Nothing crossed Sector 7. Null. The screen beeped again. Veth pulled up the reading. His fingers moved slowly at first, the automatic motions of a man who expected to find a calibration error or a ghost signal. He had seen ghost signals. They looked like this, sometimes a smear of data, a confused reading from an array that needed servicing. He ran the spectral analysis. The numbers came back. He stared at them. He ran it again. Same numbers. He pulled in the second array, the third, the fourth. All 4 independent sensor platforms, each one positioned at a different angle, each one operating on a different detection principle. All of them looking at Sector 7, null right now, and all of them agreeing. There was something there. One object, singular, moving through the dead corridor at a velocity that made Veth's chest feel strange and hollow because he knew what that velocity meant. He had studied it once, in an advanced theory course he had taken before this posting, before he had resigned himself to screens that never changed. There was a paper classified, technically, but the kind of classified that old academics quietly passed around, about a propulsion model that certain species had theorized decades ago and then stopped theorizing about. They had stopped because the humans had asked them to. The humans. Veth looked at the mass reading. He looked at it for a long time. It was not a ship. He knew what ships looked like on these sensors. He knew what fleets looked like. He had a reference chart on his second screen for exactly this kind of situation, because the compact was thorough about its reference charts. Nothing on the chart matched this. The object was large in a way that the word large did not honestly cover. It was large in a way that made the sensor readings feel like they were being polite. The 4 arrays were not designed to measure something this size in motion. They were doing their best. Their best produced a number that Veth read 3 times, each time expecting it to change, each time finding that it had not. The klaxon went off. It was a sharp sound, loud, designed to be impossible to ignore. Veth had heard it in drills. He had never heard it in an actual situation. He had not, until this moment, fully appreciated how different those 2 things were. His hand moved toward the emergency compact broadcast panel. It stopped, hovering, a few centimeters above the button. He was shaking. He noticed this the way a person notices weather, not surprised by it, just acknowledging it as a condition of the current environment. His hand was shaking, and the klaxon was screaming, and the four arrays were all still saying the same impossible number, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a very old, very quiet instinct was doing something that took him a moment to name. It was not panic. Panic was loud and scattered. This was different. It was the feeling of knowing something before you understood it. The feeling of a pattern clicking into place. He had read the old files. Every analyst at every relay outpost read them eventually, usually late in a slow shift when there was nothing else to do. The sealed records from 60 years ago. What happened when the compact first made contact with the third planet of that unremarkable yellow star in the outer arm. What the humans had done. Not violence. Never violence. Not that first time. Something harder to file away than violence. Something that had sent the compact's best diplomats into emergency session for 3 years because none of their existing frameworks had a column for it. Enthusiasm, the records called it. Uncategorized intent. Alarming goodwill. Veth's hand was still shaking. He looked at his cold meal, sitting where he had left it. He thought, with the strange calm of a man standing at the edge of something enormous, that he should have eaten it when it was warm. He thought about this for 38 seconds. Later, he would not be able to explain why. It was simply where his mind went, in those 38 seconds, before everything changed. Then he pressed the button. The broadcast went out across every compact relay in range. Every outpost, every station, every diplomatic channel that had been sitting quiet and technically active but practically ignored for the better part of 60 years. The message was short. Sensor data only. Object. Location. Velocity. Mass. 4 words at the end, because the compact broadcast protocol required a human-readable summary, and Veth, sitting in his small chair, in his cold-smelling room, found that there were only 4 words that were honest. He typed them. Incoming. Origin. Human space. He sent it. Then he sat very still, and the klaxon screamed, and the 4 arrays kept agreeing with each other, and somewhere in Sector 7, null, something the size of a small moon, moved through space that should have been impassable. It moved, like it did not know it was supposed to be impossible, or like it knew, and had simply decided that was not a good enough reason to stop. What the compact remembered. The compact high chamber had 47 seats. Every one of them was full. That alone told the story. Full sessions were rare. Full sessions called in under 6 hours were rarer. Full sessions where none of the 47 delegates were looking at each other, each one staring at the same data projection hovering in the center of the room. Each one very still had never happened before. Not once. In 400 years of recorded compact history, Rook sat at the analyst desk on the lower level, below the delegate circle, exactly where junior intelligence staff were supposed to sit when they were supposed to be invisible. She was good at invisible. She had practiced it. But invisible meant she could watch all 47 delegates at once, without any of them noticing she was doing it. And what she saw made her feel like she had swallowed something cold. They were afraid. Not the ordinary political kind of afraid, the kind that produced long speeches and procedural delays and motions to form subcommittees. This was quieter than that. Older. The kind of afraid that does not perform itself, because it does not need to. It simply sits in the body and waits. The data projection turned slowly in the center of the room. Mass, velocity, trajectory. The object was not accelerating. It was not decelerating. It was moving at a constant speed in a straight line toward the Lethany system, which was 4 inhabited planets and roughly 4 billion lives arranged around a star that had been behaving for the past 20 years in ways that the compact 17 subcommittees had been generating reports about without managing to do anything else. It has not deviated, said the senior data officer, reading from his notes with the careful tone of someone who had decided that calm was the only professional option left. In 18 hours of observation, the object has held a precise heading, 0.7 variance, which is within the margin of instrument error. What is it? Asked Delegate Pharos of the Mean Collective. Nobody answered. Because everybody in the room knew the answer, and nobody wanted to say it first. Rook pulled up the file on her personal screen. She had pulled it up before the session started, in the 20 minutes she'd had between receiving her emergency summons and arriving at the chamber. The file had a long official title that nobody used. Everyone in intelligence called it the human file. It was not one document. It was 112 years of documents, observations, reports, cross-referenced analyses, and one sealed section at the back that required a special clearance code that Rook had been given that morning, presumably because someone senior had decided that today was the day to stop pretending that section did not exist. She opened the sealed section. It began with first contact. The actual first contact. 62 years ago. The transcript of the initial communication exchange, which Rook had expected to be tense and formal, and was, in fact, neither. The humans had been the report's author, had clearly struggled with this word, had crossed out 3 other words before settling on it friendly. Immediately, and without reservation friendly, in a way that the Compact's first contact protocols had no procedure for. The protocols assumed a spectrum from hostile to neutral. Friendly was not on the spectrum. The Compact had needed 8 months just to update the protocols. The second document in the sealed section was the report from the first diplomatic delegation sent to Earth. The delegation had been made up of 7 senior diplomats, all of them experienced, all of them trained in contact scenarios that covered every situation the Compact had imagined. They had stayed on Earth for 4 months. They had come back changed in ways that were hard to put in a report, but that every person who knew them could see. The delegation's lead diplomat, a woman named Counselor San of the HFY, now retired, very old, living quietly on her home world, and reportedly refusing all interview requests, had written a single paragraph at the end of her official report that Rook read twice. I do not know how to explain what I observed on that planet. They are not like us. They are not like anything we have reference for. They are large, in ways that have nothing to do with their physical size. They are kind, in ways that feel dangerous, the way standing near a star feels dangerous, not because the star wishes you harm, but because it is so much bigger than you, and warmth at that scale is its own kind of risk. Rook closed that document and opened the next. The Behemoth class designation. 1 page. Created 60 years ago. Maintained ever since. It applied to one category of vessel, human large-scale engineering platforms, and to nothing else in the known galaxy, because nothing else in the known galaxy had ever qualified. There were 3 known Behemoth-class platforms. Until today, none of them had ever moved. She was reading the technical specifications which made her feel a specific kind of dizzy, the way heights made some people feel. Except the height in question was conceptual when Counselor Fane spoke. The chamber went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Fane was the oldest delegate. Sarathi lived long. 400 years long sometimes. Fane was 391. He had been alive for first contact. He had sat in this same chamber 62 years ago and voted on the quarantine resolution that had kept humanity at formal arm's length ever since. He stood up slowly. He did not use notes. They are not coming to threaten us, he said. The words landed in the silence. They are coming to help. More silence. Longer. The Lithani instability has been in our reports for 20 years. We have not acted. They have. He paused. They have built something we cannot build, and crossed a corridor we cannot cross. And they are moving toward 4 billion people who do not know they are in danger yet. Delegate Pharos made a noise. We do not know their intent. Their heading is their intent, Fane said. Not sharp. Just flat and final. The tone of a very old person who had outlived their patience for denial. We have been telling a story about the humans for 60 years. A comfortable story. A careful story. He looked around the room. That object moving through Sector 7. Null is the end of that story. Rook watched him sit back down. He looked tired. Not the tired of a long day. The tired of a long reckoning. The vote came 2 hours later. Open a response channel. Assign an observer team. Prepare a diplomatic contact. It passed by 9 votes. 9 out of 47. The closest vote in Compact history. Rook was assigned to the observer team. She had asked, on the submission form, to be assigned anywhere else. She understood, rereading the assignment notice, that nobody had read her preference. She spent the next 6 hours reading everything the compact had ever documented about human behavior in crisis situations. What they did when things went wrong. How they made decisions under pressure. What they were like when the stakes were real. She read until her eyes hurt and the words blurred. She closed the file. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty analyst level. All 47 seats above her dark now. The chamber still. Then she picked up her kit, walked to the transit corridor, and went to do the job she had been given. She did not feel ready. She did not think ready was available. She went anyway. The Behemoth arrives. 3 hours warning. That was what they got. A transmission on the diplomatic channel, the one that had been sitting quiet for 60 years. Technically open, practically a relic arriving with no fanfare and no preamble. Just a timestamp, a location coordinate, and a single line of text. We'll be dropping out of transit at these coordinates at 0900. Standard. Wanted to give you a heads up. ESV. Resolute. The tone of it had sent 2 of the senior diplomatic staff into a short and very tense argument about whether it was a threat or a greeting. Rook, reading it from the observer deck, thought it was neither. It was the message of someone who had been raised in a world where giving people advance notice was just basic courtesy. The humans had 3 hours to spare, and they had used all 3 of them to make sure nobody was startled. That, she thought, said more than the message itself. She was on the forward observation deck at 0855. All of the screens were live. Half the diplomatic staff was there. Nobody was talking. At 0900, exactly, it arrived. Rook had read the specifications. She had looked at the sensor data. She had spent 2 days preparing herself for the moment she saw it in person, building a mental image from the numbers, trying to make it real before it was real. It did not help. The Behemoth came out of transit the way a continent would, if a continent could move. It simply appeared, not gradually, not piece by piece all at once, the entirety of it suddenly occupying space that had been empty, and Rook's brain spent a full 4 seconds trying to process it as something other than what it was. A planetary body. A moon gone wrong. A piece of space that had somehow become structured, purposeful, covered in lights and geometry, and the dense practical architecture of something built entirely for function, and not at all for beauty. It was not beautiful. It was something beyond beautiful. The word for it was not in her language. Maybe not in any language. It was the feeling of standing next to something that could crush you, without noticing and knowing, with a certainty that bypassed thought, and went straight to the bone, that it had no interest in crushing you. That it was here for something else entirely. The humans had parked it outside territorial space. Precisely. The kind of precise that required either very good navigation or a great deal of very deliberate care. And Rook suspected it was both. The communication request came 12 minutes later. The screen opened. Commander Yael Okafor was not what Rook had been expecting, though she could not have said what she had been expecting. The commander was human, which meant the size, the build, the weight of the physical presence that came through even on a screen, but it was something else that Rook noticed first. She was calm. Not the performed calm of a diplomat or the rigid calm of a soldier. The calm of a person who had already made all the hard decisions and was now simply here to do the work. Her eyes moved, took in the observation deck, cataloged the faces. She nodded once. Commander Okafor, ESV Resolute, she said. I'm sorry we couldn't give more notice on the arrival. Transit time is what it is. She did not sound particularly sorry. She sounded accurate. We'd like to begin preliminary positioning within the next 4 hours, if you're open to that. The instability window is tighter than our initial models projected. There was a pause on the compact side. The senior diplomat, Counselor Devon, cleared his throat. He had prepared a formal address. It was 3 pages long. He had practiced it. Commander, he said, the compact wishes to express its formal acknowledgement of your arrival, and to convey that the terms of your presence in this region are subject to compact jurisdiction under Article, Counselor. Okafor's voice was the same temperature it had been before, not cutting, just even. I understand. and I want to be respectful of your process. But the cascade window opens in approximately 90 hours. After that, positioning becomes significantly harder. A pause. I'll listen to whatever you need to say. I'd just like to start the pre-positioning sequence while we talk, if that's workable. Devon looked at his 3-page address. He folded it. That is workable, he said. Rook watched this. She wrote one line in her observation log. She did not negotiate. She simply described what needed to happen. There was nothing to push back against. She looked at it, underlined it. She had the feeling it was going to be important later. The tour of the Behemoth's forward operations deck was not on the official schedule. It happened because Rook asked, and Okafor said yes, the way a person says yes to a glass of water, without calculation, without weighing anything, because there was nothing to weigh. It was large inside in the same way it was large outside, functional. Every surface doing something. People moving with the focused, unhurried speed of a team that had been working together long enough to stop narrating their actions to each other. Rook watched a group of 3 engineers at a central station running calculations she could not follow, talking in a shorthand that was technically standard but packed with terms, her translator flagged as jargon, and approximated poorly. What are they doing? She asked. Recalculating the anchor points, Okafor said. The secondary mass in the system is about 4% denser than our original survey data. Changes some of the geometry. How does that affect the operation? Okafor glanced at her. Not evaluating. Just thinking about how to answer. It means we adjust, she said. That's mostly what this job is. You build for what you know, and then you adjust for what you find. Rook wrote that down too. They were back on the observation deck, the tour done, Okafor about to return to the Behemoth, when Rook did the thing she had told herself she would not do. Why did you come? She asked. The words were out before she could pull them back, too direct, not diplomatic. She was aware, in the silence that followed, of several of her colleagues giving her a look. Okafor stopped, turned. She looked at Rook for a moment. Not long. Just long enough. There are 4 billion people in that system, she said. Simple. Flat. The way someone states a fact that is also the entire answer. What other reason would there be? Rook opened her mouth. Closed it. She had no answer. She had read 112 years of compact documents about humans. She had 6 hours of crisis behavior analysis. She had access to sealed files that most analysts never saw. None of it had prepared her for the experience of a question that was not a question. A statement so plain and so complete that arguing with it would be like arguing with gravity. 4 billion people. What other reason would there be? She stood on the observation deck after Okafor had gone and looked at the Behemoth on the screens. All the lights, all the geometry, all that impossible, patient size. She thought about the 60-year quarantine. She thought about the 17 subcommittees, and the reports, and the careful, cautious, thorough inaction of the last 2 decades, while a star system slowly built toward catastrophe. What other reason would there be? She wrote it in her log. Stared at it. Then she closed the log and went to do her job, because the cascade window was 90 hours out, and there was no more time for standing still. The first 20 hours were the quiet kind of terrifying. Nothing exploded. Nothing went wrong in any visible way. The Behemoth moved into position with the slow, deliberate patience of something that understood its own weight. Rook watched from the observer station, a small dedicated room on the compact liaison vessel, running parallel to the Behemoth's port side, and tried to do her job, which was to observe and document and stay out of the way. She documented. She observed. She did not entirely stay out of the way, because the observer station had a direct feed to the Behemoth's operational deck, and she could not stop watching it. The crew was not what she had expected. This was becoming a theme. She had, somewhere in her 6 hours of research, formed a mental image of what a human crew performing a large-scale stellar intervention would look like. The image had involved tension, a lot of movement, perhaps some shouting. She had read about, quote, human crisis behavior. She had read words like high intensity and physiologically driven and escalating response thresholds, which were clinical ways of saying that Humans under pressure tended to become very loud, and very fast, and very difficult to manage. The Behemoth crew was quiet. Not the silence of people who were scared and swallowing it. The silence of people who were concentrating. There was a difference. And after watching for 3 hours, Rook was sure of it. They talked constantly, but they talked the way instruments talk: short, specific, no wasted words. A word or two, a number, a confirmation, and the information moved from person to person and got acted on immediately without discussion, because the discussion had already happened. In the planning, in the training, in however many years of doing this work together had ground them down to the essential. Holt, the senior engineer, was the loudest. But even his loud was precise. He had a voice that carried like a structural beam, flat, load-bearing, not interested in being anything other than functional. Rook documented all of this. She documented the positioning sequence, the anchor calibrations, the sensor arrays going active. She wrote careful, measured notes in the official format. In the unofficial column she kept for herself, she wrote, "They are not performing competence. They simply are it. There is a difference." The instability announced itself at hour 23. Not with any drama, just a number changing on a screen, the kind of quiet data shift that meant something significant to everyone who understood it, and meant nothing to everyone who did not. Rook saw the change. She watched the officer who saw it first, a young woman at the central array station named Torres, according to her patch, go very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then Torres turned and said 3 words, to Holt. Holt looked at the screen. He said nothing for a moment. Then he crossed the deck to Okafor's station. Rook had no audio from that exchange. She watched it on screen. She could see the body language. She could see Okafor's head tilt as Holt spoke. She could see the moment Okafor understood what he was saying. Not because her expression changed dramatically, but because something in the set of her shoulders changed. The way a building changes when you remove one of the load-bearing walls. Everything still standing, but the weight redistributed. Okafor turned to the central projection. She looked at the numbers. She asked a question. Holt answered. She asked another. He answered again. Then they had a conversation that lasted 12 seconds. Rook's translator, running on the long-range audio pickup, caught fragments. Operational jargon. Numbers. At least 3 terms it could not translate, and marked as idiomatic context unknown. There were 2 words that appeared to be profanity, and one that appeared to be a term of endearment, which made no contextual sense, and which Rook flagged to review later. Holt nodded. That was the whole decision. 12 seconds and a nod. Okafor turned to the deck. "We're pushing past rated limit on the port anchor array," she said. Not asking. Informing. "Holt's running the numbers in real time. We'll have 2 minutes of warning if anything looks wrong, and 2 minutes is enough to pull back." Questions. Nobody asked questions. They went to work. Rook understood, later, that she had not actually understood what rated operational limits meant until she watched the Behemoth exceed them. She had thought she understood. She had the technical definitions. She knew what the numbers represented. But knowing the definition of fire and standing next to fire are 2 different kinds of knowing. And for the next hour and 40 minutes, Rook stood next to fire. The Behemoth was not built to do what it was doing. Its specifications said so, clearly, in language that was not ambiguous. The structural tolerances on the port anchor array were not designed for the load the secondary instability was putting on them. Every compact engineer on the observer station ran the same calculation. Rook could see them doing it, heads down, screens lighting up. And every single one of them arrived at the same answer. This should not hold. The humans pushed harder. The readings climbed past the yellow warning threshold, past the orange, into the red band that the compact's own engineering doctrine called "do not proceed." Every board on the Behemoth's operations deck was showing the same color. Red across the port array, amber on the secondary supports, numbers moving in directions that numbers were not supposed to move. Holt was at the array station personally. He had sent Torres to the backup console and taken the primary himself. He was working with the focused total body attention of a man who had made a decision and was not going to second-guess it, because second-guessing it now was worse than useless. His hands moved. Adjustments. Corrections. Real-time responses to a system operating outside its own limits, keeping it alive through the specific kind of knowledge that lives in the hands and not the head. The secondary instability peaked. For 40 seconds, Rook could not look away from the numbers. Then, they started to fall. Not collapse. Resolve. The cascade, the one that should have been, by all models, uncontrollable, bled off into the anchor array, and the anchor array took it and held. And the gravitational shear in the Lethany system shifted from catastrophic to critical, to serious to manageable. The numbers descending in a slow, steady exhale. And the red boards went amber, and the amber boards went yellow, and the yellow boards went green, one by one, until the entire operations deck was green and quiet. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then, someone in the back of the deck said something short and emphatic that Rook's translator declined to render in full, and several other people laughed, and someone started checking secondary systems, and Holt sat back from the station and rolled his neck in a way that suggested he had been holding it in one position for a very long time. Okafor said, "Good work," into the open deck channel. 2 words. No more than that. But the way she said it flat and real, the way a person says a thing they mean without any decoration on it, produced a visible change in the room. Not celebration. More like a long breath released. Everyone still had work to do. Everyone went back to it. Rook was still writing in her observation log when she noticed Torres. The young engineer had stepped away from the backup console. She was standing near the edge of the deck, near one of the support columns, and her head was down, and her shoulders were shaking in the small, contained way of someone who is managing something and winning, barely. She stood like that for 30 seconds. Then she lifted her head, picked up her equipment, went back to her station. Her face, when Rook caught it on the screen, was composed, professional, not blank. There was still something in it, something real and unresolved, but she had put it where it needed to go, which was somewhere internal and private and later, and returned her full attention to the board in front of her. Rook sat with that image for a long moment. Then she wrote the last line of her observer's log for that day. "I do not have the right word for what I watched today. I need a different word than brave, because brave is what you are when you do the thing in spite of the fear. What I watched today was something that used the fear, fed it into the work. I do not know a word for that. I will look for one." The official statement from the Galactic Compact was 4 paragraphs long. It acknowledged the intervention. It noted the successful stabilization of the Lethany system's gravitational anomaly. It expressed formal gratitude to the crew of the ESV Resolute and the human engineering teams aboard the Behemoth-class platform. It used careful, measured language throughout, the kind of language that had been reviewed by 11 different offices before release, the kind that committed to nothing and implied everything had been proceeding according to plan. Okafor received it, read it, and thanked the diplomatic liaison who delivered it by name. Then she went back to work, because the cleanup phase of a major stabilization operation was not nothing, and there were 47 things that still needed doing before the Behemoth could begin transit out of the system. Rook watched this and wrote in her log, "She is not interested in the recognition. I don't think she requires it. I'm not sure she understands why we thought she would." The request for a private meeting came from Counselor Fane, not through the formal diplomatic channel, through Rook, directly, because Fane had apparently decided that the formal diplomatic channel was the wrong instrument for what he wanted to say, and Rook was the one person on the compact side who had been close enough to the operation to be trusted as a messenger. He had pulled her aside that morning, in the corridor outside the liaison office, and asked in the quiet way of a very old man who had learned that directness was more efficient than ceremony. "Tell her I would like to speak with her before she leaves," he said. Not officially, personally. Rook had passed the message. Okafor had said yes without asking what it was about. They met in one of the Behemoth's small operations offices, a room that was entirely functional and not at all designed for meetings. A table, 3 chairs, some equipment Rook did not recognize stacked against the wall. Fane sat across from Okafor. Rook sat to the side, technically there as a language assistant, actually there because Fane had asked her to stay and she suspected he wanted a witness. Fane was quiet for a moment after sitting down. Not uncomfortable. collecting himself. I was alive for first contact, he said. Okafor nodded. She had been briefed on the Sarathi lifespan. I sat in the high chamber, 62 years ago, and I voted for the quarantine. He said it plainly. Not apologizing for it, not defending it. Stating it the way you state a fact you have been living with for a long time. I believed we were being prudent. I believed we needed time to understand what you were before we allowed you closer. Okafor said nothing. Her face was attentive. We spent 62 years understanding what you were, Fane continued. We built frameworks and filed reports, and held sessions, and drafted protocols. We were very thorough. He paused. The Lethani system has been flagged in our records for 20 years. We have 400 pages of documentation about it. I know, Okafor said. Not unkind, just honest. Fane looked at her. His eyes were very old. The particular old that comes not just from years but from watching enough history to know how it repeats. Were we wrong? He asked. To be cautious. To take the time we took. Were we wrong to be afraid of you? The question sat in the room. Okafor seemed to consider it seriously, which Rook appreciated, because a lesser person would have answered immediately, and the immediacy would have been its own answer. You were scared, Okafor said finally. That's not the same thing as wrong. She met his eyes. Fear makes sense. We're very loud, and we move fast, and we build things that make people nervous. I understand that. A pause. But yeah. You were also wrong. Not harsh. Not triumphant. Simply what she believed. Delivered in the same tone as everything else she said, even direct. Without performance. Fane made a sound low in his chest. Rook's translator rendered it as ambiguous, and offered 3 possible interpretations. Grief, relief, or something for which there was no clean equivalent. Rook thought it might be all 3 at once. 4 billion people, he said quietly. 4 billion people, Okafor agreed. They sat with that for a moment. Then Okafor stood, because she had 47 things that still needed doing, and she extended her hand in the human way, and Fane looked at it for just a second before taking it. And that was the end of the meeting that was not official, and not on any record except Rook's private log. The Behemoth left 2 days later. No ceremony. No formal send-off. It simply began its transit sequence. Moved to the departure corridor, and went. The lights on its hull shrank with distance, getting smaller, then gone. The way a window gets smaller when you walk away from a building, until the screens showed only empty space where it had been. Veth Saran watched it go from the Relay 9 observation deck. He had been reassigned after his broadcast, not punished, not rewarded, simply moved, the way bureaucracy moves people, according to some logic that lived at a level above the people being moved. His new posting was in the Lethani sector. Observer and communications analyst, attached to the liaison team. He had packed his things, and arrived, and done his job, and sat in new chairs, in new rooms, and eaten his meals at different temperatures, depending on whether he remembered to eat them in time. The Behemoth was a line of nothing on his screen now. He thought about the night he had sat at a different console in a different room and watched a single reading that should not have existed, and pressed a button with a shaking hand, and sent 4 words out into the galaxy. Incoming. Origin. Human space. He thought about how small that moment had felt. How uncertain. He picked up his meal. It was still warm. He ate it. Then he pulled up his communication panel. Not the official compact broadcast channel. The other one. The one that had been listed in the archive for 62 years, as human diplomatic, open low activity. He looked at it for a while. Then he typed, "Thank you." He stared at the 2 words for a moment. They seemed too small. He did not have bigger ones, so he sent them. He went back to his screens. He watched the space where the Behemoth had been, which was now just space. He read through the day's routine sensor data, a cargo freighter, a debris drift, the quiet background noise of a sector that was, for the first time in 20 years, not building toward catastrophe. 12 minutes passed. His console chimed. He looked at the screen. The response had come back on the human diplomatic channel, the one that had been a relic and was not a relic anymore. 3 words. No rank, no title, no formal header, None of the diplomatic padding that 62 years of careful distance had layered over every communication between their peoples. Anytime. Earth. Veth read it twice. He sat back in his chair. He thought about Fane, 400 years old, asking a question in a functional office on an enormous ship. He thought about Rook, somewhere in the documentation wing, writing a report that would change how 16 different intelligence academies taught their courses. He thought about Torres, standing at a support column with her shoulders shaking, and then picking up her equipment and going back to work. He thought about an object the size of a small moon, moving through space that was supposed to be impassable, because there were 4 billion people who needed it to. What other reason would there be? He understood, sitting in the quiet of his new posting with his warm meal and his 2-word message and the 3-word reply, that the story the Compact had been telling about humans was not a story about humans at all. It was a story the Compact had told about its own fear, about the particular comfort of keeping something large and unfamiliar at a careful distance, filing reports about it, building frameworks around it, so that you never had to confront the thing that was actually frightening, which was not the humans at all. It was the possibility that they were simply good at this, that they had always been good at this, and that 62 years of careful caution had not made anyone safer. It had only made 400 pages of documentation about a star system that nearly killed 4 billion people while the documentation piled up. Veth filed his daily sensor log. He noted the Behemoth's departure time. He noted the clear readings across all sectors. In the notes column, which was optional and which most analysts left blank, he wrote 3 words. Contact was right. He closed the log, started the next shift. The screens were quiet. Nothing was moving. The whole sector was still and ordinary and fine, which was, he thought, exactly what it was supposed to be. He would leave the human diplomatic channel open. He would leave it open from now on.